Hello and welcome back to RSA Conference 2018 here in San Francisco. We are on the bustling showroom floor here. I'm joined by two really luminaries of the industry. To my left, RSA Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Zilfikar Ramzan, and to his left, Chief Technology Officer of Secureworks, John Ramsey. Welcome and thank you both for being here. Wanted to bring you both together now that we're part of the Dell Technologies family to talk about some of these big cybersecurity issues that you are both talking to customers about, that you're hearing about, but a lot of organizations are really either just on their journey thinking about it or still have a lot more work to do. And so I think where a lot of the conversation starts is around digital transformation. A lot of organizations are talking about that, starting their journey. From your perspective, what should organizations be doing from a security standpoint to better secure their organization when following and pursuing these journeys?
So first of all, I think having a security mindset from the beginning is very powerful. As we think about new technologies to adopt, we have to think about how to adopt those technologies in a safe and sane fashion. So taking a step back and taking that risk view of what's happening in their environment, identifying what matters most to their organization at a business level, and making sure the security strategy aligns with their overall business strategy would be the first fundamental step.
Yeah. Well said, definitely a business-driven approach to security. I would say that the strategy also needs to include not just technology, but the people and process components of that to really be effective. Without all three of those, and probably add threat intelligence on top of it, so you're not defending yourself from everything all the time, you're defending yourself from the things you need to defend yourself. You need to defend the things that are important to the business.
Good points. And as you think about it, how can organizations protect the data when they're pursuing these journeys, but also adopting new technology? What would be some of your advice for those customers or for those organizations about protecting data?
So I would say the first big step is knowing where your data is, knowing who's accessing it, and knowing what your critical assets are. It's 100% right. Today, security has to be driven by the bits and bytes that matter most. But it's also important to keep in mind that for many organizations, it's not just about data, it's about business objectives. And that might involve, for example, data relevant to keeping a critical system up and running. And so it might not just be about intellectual property, but about understanding what it is that brings value back to the organization. And to me, that's the first fundamental step. Once you kind of know where your data is, you've got to figure out how it's being accessed, who's accessing it, for what purpose, and having visibility across all your key assets as part of doing that. Because to me, without visibility, you can't get very far in your security posture.
Yeah, well, I think we both agree visibility is absolutely critical to being able to defend. You can't defend what you can't see. Yeah. And so having that visibility and then doing something with the visibility, not just taking in logs, but looking at those logs for things that would represent something malicious.
And in your opinions, with the proliferation of IoT, connected devices, AI, do you think there's a need now for standardized security guidelines?
In the IoT space, I think it's important that it's a market-led thing and not necessarily a regulatory compliance thing, and that the market, when necessary, like in medical devices, will force the kind of resiliency and security you would need in a device like that.
Right, I think from my perspective, the challenge I think is going to be that the average consumer doesn't understand the nuances of security, understanding when they're buying a device that could harm somebody else in the process. So I think it's going to have to be a healthy balance between trying to create some guidelines. I don't want to say the word standard because that's too force-fitting and too rigid, but maybe guidelines. Maybe there's some equivalent of a UL certification of some sort related to IoT devices, and people who are certified against it can find ways to market that as an advantage. But I'm not sure if that's the right solution. I think that's just one of many possibilities. But I think I agree 100% that without some type of overarching framework to think about IoT security, our consumers are going to be left in the dust in terms of figuring out the right thing to do.
Right. And I think what's happening now in that market is the IoT providers are assuming that the environment is going to defend the IoT device, and the environment providers are assuming that the IoT devices are secure. And so their assumption between the two is causing an issue where there's a lot of vulnerability in IoT right now.
So that actually brings up our next point. Around the growth and adoption of IoT, how have you seen this technology really shift and impact enterprise security strategies?
So I think nobody could have expected the extreme proliferation of IoT devices
Yeah.
that would be happen. I mean, I guess people in the industry have thought about this for a long time, but if you look at the average consumer and just how many devices they have on their person that can transmit data, they don't even realize it's being transmitted. And now you take that up a level to what's happening within enterprise boundaries. There's a blurring distinction between what is or isn't part of an enterprise boundary, and that means there's a blurring distinction between what important information is being pilfered out of that boundary, whether it's on purpose or accidental.
Right.
Definitely, I think what you find, especially in the IoT space, is every company is becoming a data company.
Yeah.
And that data company is being driven by a lot of IoT technology, a lot of sensoring information that's helping businesses make better decisions. It's part of the reason artificial intelligence is performing so well these days, because the sensors themselves are getting so much better. And so as your business becomes more and more dependent on things that you don't usually consider a risk, like when you think IoT and when traditional organizations think about IoT, they think about it like a thermometer on a wall, and they don't think that, like, well, maybe it's like internet connected and it's collecting data that's used to drive a critical process potentially.
Right. And some feel that there are some limitations around machine learning and AI. How can we as security practitioners address some of those maybe vulnerabilities that you were talking about and some of those gaps?
Right, so I think there's two elements, but one is the correct use of artificial intelligence in your environment.
Yep.
And to me, there's an expression Michael Dell likes to use, which is that if AI is a rocket ship, data is the fuel. And when you think about it, you need both data and the rocket. You need both the fuel and the rocket to work correctly.
Yeah.
If you don't have enough fuel, if you have a good rocket, it doesn't matter. And if you've got a mediocre rocket but not enough fuel, that same thing is connected. So to me, I think the real critical issue is that you've got to look at AI much more holistically, have the right data, have the right people look at that data and know what to look for that's meaningful, and have that domain expertise, and then couple the richness of the data with the richness of the domain expertise together with the AI techniques. And I think if you do the first two parts right, it almost doesn't matter how fancy your AI is at the end. Almost any off-the-shelf AI technique will work really well. The second key thing to think about is if you're going to embrace AI, how do you think about security within the context of AI?
Right.
The reality is that many people treat AI as a black box. And if they're deriving models from their data and don't understand how those models are being derived, there's a very legitimate risk that somebody could come in and through some small minor data modifications could create models that will create behaviors that are completely unanticipated. And nobody's going to understand how those models came about because they don't understand how the black magic works underneath.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. The importance of AI, and just because of the complexity of how it works in the model generation, knowing that the models are actually accurate is a real problem. In the security space, AI, I think, is one of the most important technologies to change the nature, especially when there's such a shortage of cybersecurity talent. And so the Secureworks approach using AI is very threat intelligence driven. So we take a security researcher's approach to artificial intelligence by writing things like classifiers that know the nuances of the threat to be able to detect and learn from the threat and their changes.
So that actually, it's a very good point. And thinking about IoT and AI, it's one thing to talk about some of those vulnerabilities and gaps, but I think, as you mentioned, John, there's also some real opportunity in the Security Operations Center environment, the SOC environment. Zuli, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the reality is that we don't have enough analysts out there to deal with every single security issue that we can possibly handle. And what artificial intelligence does is it acts as a force multiplier. It makes analysts, to some degree, more powerful because on the one hand, you can use AI to surface the most relevant, interesting events. You can use AI to detect interesting events as well and reduce the load on the analyst. To me, the third place where AI will be used in the SOC is for how you do effective response automation and orchestration. That is a burgeoning area because the reality is everyone's got all these vendors, they've got to make all these technologies work together. And by applying analytical techniques, including machine learning and AI, we may be able to find new ways to orchestrate technologies and really help the Security Operations Center out considerably.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about artificial intelligence at Secureworks is we have hundreds of analysts, and we don't want them spending time on things that we're confident on. So we're 100% confident that that's 100% likely to be malicious. And so where we want analysts spending time is as threat actor tactics change, we want them to study the threat actor tactics and then supervise a machine learning model to be able to learn those new tactics, to then be able to effectively drive the confidence of the artificial intelligence systems up.
Right. So the other piece to talk about, I think, is what are some of the risks that we're potentially introducing by bringing in AI and IoT into our SOC, maybe prematurely before we really thought it through? What are some of those vulnerabilities that maybe people aren't thinking about?
Right, I think John alluded to something earlier. When you look at new technology, it's not about the technology in isolation. It's about the people and process that goes together with the technology. If those three elements aren't working in harmony, then it doesn't matter what technologies you bring in. You won't be able to use them to gain value in your environment. So for example, let's say tomorrow you decide you're going to implement a brand new deep neural network because it provides all these benefits. Let's say something goes wrong and you have to be able to fix the issue. Well, you need somebody with a PhD in artificial intelligence to come in and fix it. And if so, do you have access to that person to actually deal with the issue up front? And if not, you've got to think about that element entirely. So to me, it's the process and people that matter just as much as technology when we embrace new technical concepts into our environments.
Yeah, the other thing about IoT that's really and could be impactful or interesting is that it gives a physical component to a cyber threat to be able to actually manipulate an environment or do something that they couldn't necessarily do before. And that really becomes like a safety issue. So now it's not just confidentiality, integrity, and availability, it's also safety.
Moving away a little bit from AI and IoT, do you think we'll ever really see automated end-to-end security?
I think for certain simple use cases, you can get automated end-to-end security, and some of the very trivial things that happen within a SOC can certainly be automated. I think the real value in automation is not just in trying to do end-to-end automation, but in trying to automate the more mundane tasks. So you look at a typical SOC analyst, they spend time cutting and pasting URLs, they spend time filling out forms, they spend time doing whois lookups on data, they spend time doing GeoIP lookups, they spend time imaging systems, they spend time filing trouble tickets to make systems fixed. That's a lot of time spent on things that could be easily automated. And so to me, that is really where the magic of automation is going to come in.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do have hope for the ability for machines to eventually be able to do detection as well as make a decision on what the best response is and then take that response. So we have components now of the ability to learn detections, and then when we start applying more AI techniques to the response part of it, we'll be able to automate a lot more of that, and I think that's exciting. The real part about automation is not that it's not that it's automated. It's that someone is allowing it to do automation.
Right.
And people, like what I hear from clients is they want to make sure that they are not going to break something quickly with automation. And so having confidence in the automation, maybe by some artificial intelligence that says that this will have no unintended consequence to the business, is what we need as the next step to be able to actually get to true automation.
So a lot of conversations here at the RSA conference about a whole range of topics, but from each of you, what do you think we'll be talking about in 5 years as it relates to cybersecurity?
I think that there are a handful of things that will change over the next 5 years. I certainly think artificial intelligence will continue to have a bigger role. I think the ability for analysts to be more impactful with less resources will be more important. And I think what we're going to find is that businesses are going to be more driven. If you just detect something and you don't take any kind of response for it or do any kind of preventative action, I think you're not reducing any risk for the business. Just knowing that there's something going on isn't helpful. And so I think we're going to see a lot of burgeoning technology and capability come out that allows you to actually do a lot more that you couldn't do before, especially in like software-defined data centers where now everything is API interrogatable and API manipulatable. So now you can actually start building this automation and capability so an analyst can take very wide and aggressive actions very, very easily, very, very quickly.
Kind of my hope in the next 5 years is that, and I believe this is going to happen, we'll start seeing organizations take a much more deeper risk-driven view of their security posture. Today, people buy a bunch of devices, they deploy them, and they kind of hope to see what works, and then they report back up to their board or their CISO or the CIO about the corresponding results. But we have to take a fundamental step back and think through risk. That's an area that's been, in many ways, very murky. In more recent times, we've seen interesting models pop up like FAIR or Bowtie and others that can help you reason about your risks. As those models mature, and as our ability to understand and reason about risks improves, we'll be able to truly start connecting security results with business results. And that to me will be the holy grail, and I hope to get there within 5 years.
Yeah, I do think that's important. And to that point of all of the proliferation of devices, I mean, we've lived in an industry that's done defense in depth for decades. And that's why you have about the top 160 Secureworks clients in terms of revenue on average have 57 controls in their environment.
Wow.
So the question becomes, do I add the 58? Do I add the 59? And if not, then what is the thing that I'm going to do that's the next step function in risk reduction?
Right.
And I think the answer to that is what you're going to see is more context sharing and more collaboration among the layers themselves to be able to sort of fill the gaps between independent layers.
And final question for both of you, do you think, have we met the technology yet to solve all of these critical security problems, or are we still looking for it out there?
Well, the reality is that the problems we see evolve over time with respect to the overall landscape around us. New technologies are constantly being introduced. There are new words entering the IT lexicon at an unsettling pace. And for us, we can't ever rest on our laurels and say we've met the technology yet. We're going to have to keep beating the technology. Security is not just about an individual end state, it's about a journey and a process to get there.
Yeah, I think as long as there's a bad guy on the other end of the wire, there's going to need to be a good guy on the other end of the wire.
Good way to wrap it up. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your time this afternoon, helping impart a lot of knowledge, really. And we look forward to hopefully having this discussion again in a year to see how we tracked on it and to see what actually came to fruition. So until then, next time.